I arrived without warning to visit my daughter. She was sprawled on the rug right by the front door, dressed in old and tattered clothes. Her husband casually wiped his boots on her back and told the guests, "That is just our crazy maid." No. I let out a cry. I stepped forward, and everyone froze because one of the guests dropped his glass. He stared at me as if he had seen a ghost. 20 years ago, I saved that man's life. For 4 hours, I literally held his intestines in my hands over the operating table. He had sworn he would return the favor one day. That moment had finally come, but I still did not know the most important thing. I did not know my daughter had married that man because he reminded her of me. I did not know that her whole life she had been searching for a man who would control her, humiliate her, and destroy her, all because I was the one who taught her that this was what love looked like. Her husband turned out to be me, only louder and more honest about it. And now, to save my daughter, I will first have to admit that I was the one who broke her in the first place. Before we go any further, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and let me know in the comments which city you are listening from. Now, let us get back to the story. The taxi pulled over about 300 yards from the estate. The driver killed the engine, making it clear he was not going any further. Elias Braithwaite looked at him through the rearview mirror and saw the tight lips of a man who had made a final decision and was not about to change it. "I cannot go any further," the cabbie said without turning around. "The owner of this place does not like unfamiliar cars near the front gate. Last time I came up here, security slashed my tires. I still need this car to make a living." Elias did not argue. He paid the man, grabbed his small duffel bag from the back seat, and stepped out onto the edge of the rural road. The October wind bit at his face, carrying the smell of rotting leaves and distant chimney smoke. The mansion sat atop a hill, surrounded by wrought iron gates and a hedge that looked perfectly manicured even on this overcast day. The T pulled a U-turn and disappeared, leaving Elias alone on the empty road. He stood there for a minute, looking at the house where his daughter lived. 3 stories, white columns, panoramic windows, the kind of wealth that was supposed to mean happiness. A year and a half ago, at the wedding, he had looked at Aaliyah and thought she had finally found what she deserved. A young, successful, polite husband, a house that looked like a palace, a future where she would never have to count pennies until payday, the way her mother used to. Since then, Aaliyah had stopped answering his calls. First, she would just let it ring. Then she started sending short text messages. "I'm busy. I will call you later." Later never came. Elias wrote emails, but the replies became increasingly brief and formal until they stopped altogether. He called the house landline, but an educated female voice always informed him that Mrs. Aaliyah Kingsley was resting and could not be disturbed. 3 weeks ago, Elias received the last message from his daughter. It was only 2 words. "Dad, help." He called back immediately, but the number was disconnected. Since then, the phone had remained silent. And now, he was here, unannounced and uninvited. A retired army surgeon, 60 years old, a man who had seen many things in his life, but had never felt a chill in his chest like the one he felt now. Looking at that beautiful White House, Elias threw his bag over his shoulder and walked down the path toward the gates. With every step, the cold in his chest intensified, though he could not explain why. Everything looked normal. A well-kept garden behind the fence, luxury cars in the driveway, lights in the first-floor windows, and the sounds of music and laughter drifting from somewhere inside. There was a security booth by the gate, but it was empty. Elias pressed the buzzer and waited. No one answered. He pressed it again, longer this time. Still silence. Then he pushed the small pedestrian door next to the main gate, expecting it to be locked, but it gave way easily. Elias entered the grounds and walked up the driveway toward the main entrance. He could hear the music more clearly now, some kind of jazz, and the voices of many people. There was clearly a party going on. Stepping onto the porch, he rang the bell. He waited, then rang again. No one opened the door, even though he could hear noise behind it. Elias circled the house to the right, walking along the wall. The music grew louder. Rounding the corner, he found a terrace with panoramic windows through which he could see a large ballroom filled with people. Men in expensive suits, women in evening gowns, servers with trays, and a shimmering chandelier hanging from the ceiling. He scanned the room for his daughter, but could not find her among the guests. Further down the wall, Elias discovered a small door, clearly a service entrance for the staff. He pushed it, and it turned out to be unlocked. Inside was a narrow hallway with white walls that smelled of cleaning products, a corridor for the help that led to the main rooms. Elias walked down it, opened another door, and found himself in the mansion's foyer. That was when he saw his daughter. Aaliyah was lying on the floor by the front door, directly on the decorative rug that said "Welcome." She was wearing a faded gray t-shirt and sweatpants with holes in the knees. Her hair, once thick and shiny, hung in tangled, greasy clumps. She was not moving. She just stared at the ceiling with empty eyes, as if she could not see or hear anything around her. The guests walked past her, as if she were a piece of furniture. Some stepped over her legs. Others walked around her without even looking down. Then a young man in a perfectly tailored gray suit stepped out of the ballroom. Elias recognized him. Julian, Aaliyah's husband. The son-in-law he had only seen at the wedding, who had seemed so polite and self-assured back then. Julian walked toward the door without looking at the floor. He stood directly on Aaliyah, his feet planted on her abdomen, and began to wipe the soles of his patent leather shoes. He rubbed one, then the other, as if she were not a person, but a simple doormat. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said loudly, addressing the guests in the foyer, "pay no attention. That is just our crazy maid. The poor thing is not right in the head, but we look after her. It is our way of giving back to the community." Some guests laughed. Others shook their heads with fake pity. No one protested. Elias stood at the entrance of the service hallway, and the world around him shrank to the size of that scene. To his daughter's body on the floor, to the polished shoes on her stomach, to the laughter that sounded like glass grinding against glass. He did not scream. He did not rush forward. He took one step, just one step, into the foyer. At that moment, someone in the ballroom dropped a glass. The clatter of crystal against the marble floor made everyone turn their heads. Standing at the entrance of the ballroom was a gray-haired man, around 65 years old, wearing an impeccable dark blue suit. The champagne glass lay at his feet, and a golden puddle was spreading across the floor. But he did not notice. He was staring at Elias as if he had seen someone rise from the grave. Elias recognized him too. He had seen those eyes 20 years ago when they opened after a grueling multi-hour surgery. Silas Abernathy. Back then, he was a young entrepreneur who had been in a horrific accident on a rain-slicked mountain road. A ruptured spleen, liver damage, multiple internal hemorrhages. Any other surgeon would have walked away from the case. They would have said there was no hope. Elias operated for 4 hours straight, literally putting the man back together piece by piece. When Abernathy regained consciousness, he wept and kept repeating, "I will return the favor, no matter what it takes. I am in your debt for the rest of my life." Now, that man was standing in the middle of a party, looking at Elias with eyes full of terror. "Elias Braithwaite," Abernathy whispered, his voice trembling. Julian looked up at the sound of the name and saw his father-in-law. For a split second, his face froze, and something sharp and dangerous flashed in his eyes, like the blade of a hidden knife. But then his expression shifted, as if someone had flipped a switch. Julian broke into a wide grin. "Dad?" he exclaimed, stepping off Aaliyah's body and heading toward Elias with open arms. "My God! What a surprise! What a wonderful surprise! Why didn't you let us know? We would have welcomed you properly." Elias did not return the hug. He looked past his son-in-law at his daughter, who was still lying on the floor. Aaliyah slowly turned her head and looked at him. There was no recognition in her eyes, only emptiness and something that looked like fear. "Aaliyah!" Elias called out, his voice sounding raspy. She blinked once, then twice. Her lips moved. "Dad?" she whispered so softly he could barely hear her. "Dad, are you alive?" Julian turned back to the guests, still smiling. "Friends, please excuse this little scene. My wife and her father haven't seen each other in a long time." She got a bit overwhelmed. "You know how emotional women can be." He signaled to the guard by the door, who began to gently guide the guests back into the ballroom. People left, glancing back with curiosity, whispering about what they had seen. Silas Abernathy did not move. He remained standing there, looking at Elias with a gaze that felt like a plea. Julian walked over to Aaliyah and helped her up. She moved like a puppet, being pulled by invisible strings. Her arms hung limp at her sides, and Elias saw the marks on the inside of her elbows. Small bruises, needle marks, dozens of them. "Honey, look who is here," Julian murmured, holding his wife by the waist. "Your dad, isn't that wonderful?" Aaliyah looked at Elias, and slowly, very slowly, something living appeared in her eyes. Recognition. And with it, fear. A fear so intense, her whole body began to shake. "Are you alive?" she repeated. "He said you were dead. He showed me the newspaper. The obituary." "What?" Elias took a step toward her. "What obituary, Aaliyah? What are you talking about?" Julian laughed, and the sound was perfectly natural, perfectly carefree. "My poor girl. See, Dad? See how she gets things confused? It is the illness, the hallucinations, the delusions. The doctors say it is a form of schizophrenia, triggered by substance abuse. Yes, it is hard for me to talk about this, but your daughter became addicted to illegal substances. I am doing everything I can to help her, the best doctors, the best medications, but so far, unfortunately, there has not been much progress." Elias looked into his son-in-law's eyes. 30 years of surgical practice had taught him how to spot a lie, how to see the fear hidden behind bravado, how to see the calculation behind a smile. "I want to speak with my daughter alone," he said. Of course, Julian nodded. "But first, let us get you settled. We have plenty of guest rooms. You must be exhausted from the trip. And I am going to put Aaliyah down for a rest now. She needs to take her medication. I want to talk to her now. Dad, please." Julian lowered his voice and stepped closer. "Do not make a scene in front of the guests. These are important people. My business depends on them." Let us talk about everything calmly, as a family. I will take Aaliyah upstairs, and then you and I can talk man to man. Sound good?" He did not wait for an answer. He took Aaliyah by the elbow and led her toward the staircase to the second floor. She followed him meekly, like a child. Only once did she look back at her father, and the pain in her eyes was enough to take Elias's breath away. He tried to follow them. He took a step toward the stairs, but two large men in black suits appeared in front of him as if they had grown out of the floor. "Security. Sorry, sir," one of them said politely but firmly. "Mr. Kingsley asks that you wait for him in his study." Elias could have tried to push past them. He could have caused a scene, but he knew it would be useless. 2 guards against a 60-year-old man. Even if he made it upstairs, then what? Julian would call the police, and on paper, he would be right. Trespassing, assault. He needed information. He needed a plan. "Fine," Elias said. "Where's the study?" They led him through the foyer, past the ballroom, where the party continued as if nothing had happened, and into a far wing of the house. The study was a spacious room with oak paneling, a massive desk, and leather armchairs. Behind the glass of the bookshelves were rows of books that clearly no one had ever read. The spines were too perfect. The bindings, too, identical. The guards stayed outside the door. Elias walked over to the window and looked out at the dark garden. His hands were shaking, not with fear, but with a rage he was holding back with everything he had. The door opened, and Silas Abernathy walked in. He looked 10 years older than when Elias had seen him in the foyer. He closed the door behind him and stood there, not daring to come any closer. "Elias Braithwaite," he began, his voice cracking. "I did not know. I swear on everything. Holy. I did not know." "You did not know what?" Elias did not turn away from the window. "What he is doing to her. I thought she was happy. I was the one who introduced them. That is my sin." Elias finally turned and looked at the man whose life he had saved 20 years ago. "Tell me," he said, "everything, from the beginning." Abernathy sank into an armchair as if his legs refused to hold him. "It started 2 years ago. I was at a charity gala. Julian was there too. He is the son of an old business associate. We got to talking. He mentioned he was looking for a wife. I thought of your daughter. She was working at a publishing house back then. I had seen her a couple of times at events. Smart, beautiful, modest, the ideal wife for a man in his circle." He fell silent, rubbing his forehead. "I introduced them. I set up a meeting at a reception. They liked each other. 6 months later, the wedding, I was there. I saw how she looked at him. She was in love, truly in love. And then I went to Europe for 6 months on business. When I got back, I started hearing rumors that Julian's young wife was sick, that she had a drug problem, that he was taking her from doctor to doctor. I wanted to visit, but Julian always found an excuse. Quarantine, or Aaliyah feeling unwell, or they were away for treatment." Abernathy looked up at Elias. "Today was the first time I saw her in a year. And I saw you, and I realized he is doing the same thing to her that he did to the others." Elias felt the cold in his chest turn to ice. What others? Abernathy opened his mouth to answer, but at that moment, the door burst open and Julian walked in. He was smiling, but his eyes were cold and sharp, like someone evaluating an opponent. "Silas," he said reproachfully, "you left the guests for a private conversation. That is not very polite." Abernathy stood up, and Elias saw him go pale. Fear. This influential man was afraid of a 35-year-old kid. I just wanted, Abernathy began. I understand, Julian interrupted. You wanted to pay your respects to my wife's father. Very touching. Now, please, head back to the guests. I need to speak with my father-in-law alone. Abernathy looked at Elias. His gaze held something like an apology and a warning. We will see each other again, he said quietly, and walked out. Julian closed the door behind him and turned to Elias. The smile vanished from his face like a charcoal sketch being wiped away. Well, he said, walking over to the desk and sitting in the owner's chair. Let us talk man to man. Julian leaned back in the chair and crossed his arms over his chest, watching Elias with the expression of someone who had the situation completely under control. There was no trace left of the friendly smile he had shown the guests. Now, it was the face of a predator that had cornered its prey and was enjoying its helplessness. Sit down. He gestured toward the armchair across from the desk. This will be a long conversation. Elias did not sit. He remained standing by the window, arms crossed, looking at his son-in-law the way he used to look at junior officers who tried to lie to him. That look usually made people sweat and stutter, but Julian held it without any visible discomfort. Suit yourself, Julian shrugged. Stand if it makes you feel better, though at your age I would look after my legs. What is happening to my daughter? Elias was not asking. He was demanding an answer. Julian sighed with the air of someone forced to explain obvious things to a slow child. He opened a desk drawer, pulled out a file, and laid it in front of him. I was hoping we would not have to do this, he said. I hoped you would just accept the situation as it is, without unnecessary questions, but since you insist, here. He opened the file and turned it so Elias could see the contents. Medical reports on official letterhead, prescriptions, photographs. Your daughter is ill, Julian said with a carefully rehearsed sadness in his voice. Schizoaffective disorder triggered by the abuse of psychoactive substances. In plain English, she got hooked on drugs 3 months after our wedding. First cocaine, then something stronger. I tried to stop her, but it was too late. The psychosis started, the hallucinations, the aggressive episodes. He pulled a photo from the folder and held it out to Elias. It was Aaliyah, but she was hard to recognize. Her hair was a mess, her eyes were wild, and her mouth was twisted in a scream. She was standing in the corner of some room, clutching a knife to her chest. This was 8 months ago, Julian said. She tried to stab me. She said I was poisoning her food, that I wanted to kill her. Classic paranoid delusion. Elias took the photograph and examined it carefully. His trained surgeon's eye noticed details a normal person would have missed. Dilated pupils, a natural paleness of the skin, a body posture characteristic of someone struggling with a loss of coordination. This did not look like cocaine psychosis. This looked like poisoning. I took her to the best specialists, Julian continued. A clinic in Switzerland, professors from Germany. They all say the same thing. Irreversible changes to the psyche. She will never be the same again. He pulled out more documents, medical reports with seals and signatures. I could have had her committed to a locked psychiatric ward. Julian's voice softened, becoming sympathetic. I had every right. But I love your daughter, Elias, despite everything. That is why I keep her at home. I provide care. I pay for the treatment. It costs me a lot of money and a lot of nerves, but I do not complain. Elias set the photograph back on the desk. Why was she lying on the floor by the door? He asked in a calm voice. She lay down there herself. Julian spread his hands. It is part of her disorder. Sometimes she refuses to get up from the floor for hours. Sometimes she strips completely naked and runs through the house. Sometimes she screams that she was kidnapped by aliens. The doctors call them catatonic episodes. And the part where you wiped your feet on her? Julian froze for a second, and Elias saw irritation flare in his eyes. But it disappeared instantly, replaced by an expression of patient compassion. I did not even notice she was lying there, he said. Can you imagine how horrible that is? My own wife sprawled on the floor, and I am so used to it that I just walked past without looking. That is what it has come to. This is what I live with every day. He shook his head, playing the role of exhaustion and despair so convincingly that an unsuspecting person would have believed him without a doubt. Listen, Elias. Julian leaned forward, his voice becoming almost confidential. I understand this is hard for you to accept. She is your daughter. You remember her differently, healthy and happy. But reality is what it is. Aaliyah is sick. Seriously. Possibly incurably sick. I am doing everything in my power to ease her suffering. Elias remained silent, processing what he had heard. In 30 years as a surgeon, he had learned to listen not just to words, but to the pauses between them. He had learned to notice how a person breathes when they tell the truth versus when they lie. Julian was lying. Elias was as sure of that as he was of his own name. But certainty alone was not enough. He needed proof. She said I was dead, Elias stated. She said you showed her an obituary. Julian sighed again, this time with a touch of condescension. And you believe a woman who yesterday claimed the neighbor's cat was speaking to her in German? He shook his head. Elias, I understand a father's feelings, but let us be realistic. Aaliyah cannot distinguish reality from her hallucinations. She might have seen an obituary of some stranger in a magazine and decided it was you, or she just made up the whole story. He leaned back and looked at Elias with a different expression now, evaluative and calculating. Let us speak frankly, he said. I know what you think of me. I saw it in your eyes when you walked in. You think I am a monster mistreating your daughter, but the truth is, I am the only person who takes care of her. He stood up and walked over to the bar in the corner of the study. He poured himself a whiskey into a heavy crystal glass. Where were you for the last year and a half? He asked without turning around. She stopped answering your calls, and you just resigned yourself to it. You did not come. You did not check. Do you know why? Because it was convenient for you to think she was happy. Convenient not to know the truth. Elias felt those words hit the mark because they were true. He really had convinced himself that his daughter's silence just meant she was busy, not in trouble. He convinced himself that a wealthy husband would take care of her better than he ever could. But I was by her side, Julian continued, turning back with the glass in his hand. Every day, every night. When she screamed from nightmares. When she did not recognize me and called me by other names. When she tried to jump out the window. I held her hands and begged her to live. I did. Not you. He took a sip of whiskey and narrowed his eyes. So before you judge me, look at yourself. What kind of father were you if she did not call you for help when it all started? Maybe because she knew you did not really care. Elias clenched his fists so hard his nails dug into his palms. He wanted to cross the room and strike that arrogant bastard. He wanted to grab him by the throat and shake the truth out of him. But he held back. He understood that this was exactly what Julian wanted. One punch, a call to the police, an assault charge, and a court-ordered restraining order, keeping him away from his daughter. This man was smart, dangerously smart. You know, Julian continued, his voice taking on a new, almost friendly tone. Aaliyah told me a lot about her childhood, about you, about your wife, Lena. At the mention of his wife's name, Elias flinched, and Julian noticed. A barely perceptible smile touched his lips. She told me how her mom was afraid of you, how she walked through the house on eggshells so as not to disturb the great surgeon, how she cried at night in the bathroom so no one would hear, how she begged you to let her go visit her sister for a week. And you would say, no, because her place was by her husband's side. Elias stood motionless, and every word fell on him like a stone. Aaliyah said her mother did not die of a heart attack. Julian's voice became soft and insinuating. She died from living with you. She just did not want to wake up one morning. Her body failed because her soul gave up first. Shut it up. Elias heard his own voice, as if it were coming from someone else. The truth is uncomfortable, isn't it? Julian stepped closer, something dark and amused dancing in his eyes. You recognize me, don't you, Elias? You recognize me because we are alike. I simply do what you did, only openly, without pretending, without the mask of the intellectual doctor. Aaliyah chose me because I seemed familiar, because you taught her that a man should control and a woman should obey. He stopped 2 paces from Elias and looked him straight in the eye. So if you want to know who is to blame for your daughter lying on the rug by the door, look in the mirror. You started it. I just continued it. Elias swung. He did not plan it. He did not have time to think. His fist shot forward and crashed into the Julian's jaw. Julian went flying back, his back hitting the desk and knocking over the glass of whiskey. The amber liquid spilled across the documents. The study door burst open, and the 2 guards rushed in. They grabbed Elias by the arms and twisted them behind his back. He did not resist. He just stood there, watching, as Julian stood up, rubbing his jaw. Well, Julian said, and there was satisfaction in his voice. That was predictable. Aggression, an inability to control emotions. Now, it is clear where Aaliyah gets it from. He signaled to the guards, and they let go of Elias, but remained standing right behind him. I could call the police, Julian continued, sitting on the edge of the desk. Assault in my own home is a criminal case. But I will not do it, because I understand your feelings. You are a father. You are upset. I forgive you. He leaned forward, and his voice hardened, but only slightly. Here is what I am proposing, Elias. You go home today, right now. You go back to your life and never come back here again. I will transfer enough money to you every month so you can live well. Travel, good food, medical care, whatever you want. And if I refuse, Julian shrugged, then I will have Aaliyah committed to a state psychiatric facility. I have all the necessary paperwork, medical reports, doctors' signatures. The court will declare her incapacitated in a day. And you? I will charge you with trespassing and assault. My godfather is a judge on the state Supreme Court. How do you think that ends for you? Elias remained silent. Thoughts were keening through his head at lightning speed. Aaliyah on the floor, the needle marks on her arms, the empty eyes, her saying, "Are you alive?" And alongside that, Julian's words about Lena, about the wife crying in the bathroom, about control, about Aaliyah choosing someone similar. The terrible realization that there was truth in those words. Not the whole truth, but a part of it. The part Elias had hidden from himself for 20 years. Think it over carefully, Julian said, almost gently. I am not a monster. I am just a pragmatist. I do not need scandals. I do not need a war with relatives. I need peace. Go. Live well, and everyone wins. He stood up and headed for the door. The guards will escort you out. They will call a car for you. Think about my proposal on the way. If you accept, call this number tomorrow. He placed a business card on the edge of the desk and walked out. The guards took Elias by the elbows and led him toward the exit. He did not fight them. He walked through the halls of the mansion, past rooms with expensive furniture, past paintings and sculptures, thinking only of one thing: needle marks, dilated pupils, loss of coordination, slurred speech. He had seen that before. More than once, during his time at the VA hospital, when they brought in prisoners who had been interrogated with chemical substances. Drugs that erase the will, drugs that cause hallucinations and paranoia, drugs that make a healthy person look insane. Aaliyah was not being treated, she was being poisoned. The guards led him out the front entrance and left him on the porch. A taxi was already waiting at the bottom of the steps. Elias walked down, got into the car, and gave the address of the train station. The taxi pulled away, and the mansion began to shrink in the rear window. But Elias did not look back. He looked at the business card he was still holding in his hand. On the back of the card, beneath the printed phone number, someone had handwritten a few words. River Street, house number 11. I am waiting. The handwriting was unfamiliar. Someone from the party, someone who saw what happened. Elias tucked the card into his pocket and gave the driver a new address. The house on River Street turned out to be an old mansion squeezed between modern office buildings, like a fragment of the previous century that the city had forgotten to grind down. The T stopped in front of wrought iron gates, behind which lay a neglected garden with bare trees and cracked stone paths. Elias paid and got out, feeling the night chill seep under his coat. The gates were slightly ajar, as if they were expecting him. He walked down the path to the heavy wooden door and barely had time to knock before it opened. Standing in the doorway was Abernathy, now without his jacket, his shirt unbuttoned at the neck. He looked like a man who had not slept in days and did not plan to sleep for several more. "Come in," he said softly, stepping aside. The house smelled of old wood and book dust. Abernathy led him through a dark hallway to a room where a fire was burning in the hearth. 2 armchairs faced the fire. On the small table between them sat a decanter of cognac and 2 glasses. "Sit down," Abernathy said. "This will be a long talk." Elias sat but declined the cognac. Abernathy poured himself a glass, took a large swallow, and sank into the opposite chair. For several minutes they sat in silence, watching the fire. Then Abernathy spoke. "20 years ago, you pulled me back from the brink," he began. "I was dead, Elias. The paramedics closed my eyes and told my wife to prepare for a funeral. And then you showed up. 4 hours on the table, 43 stitches, nearly 15 pints of donor blood. You put me back together like a broken doll." He swirled the glass in his hand, watching the cognac reflect the flames. "When I woke up, the first thing I did was make a promise that I would return the favor, no matter what it cost, at any time. I remember every word, because I have repeated them to myself every day for all these years." "Then return it now," Elias said. "Tell me everything you know about Julian." Abernathy looked up at him, his eyes filled with the pain of someone preparing to confess something terrible. "I have to start with myself," he whispered, "because without that, you will not understand. Julian is my sin. I created that monster." He set the glass down and interlaced his fingers. "His father, Silas Kingsley, was my business partner. We started together in the 90s, back when money was made in ways it is better not to remember. Silas was a ruthless man, but I considered him a friend. When Julian was 15, Silas asked me to be his godfather. I agreed without thinking. He stood up and walked to the fireplace, staring into the embers. Julian grew up to be a strange boy, smart, charming, but cold. He never cried, not even when he scraped his knee or got bad grades. I thought it was strength of character. Now, I understand it was the absence of something vital, that thing that makes us human. What happened to his wives? Elias asked. Abernathy turned, his face contorting. The first one, Marina, was the daughter of a banker. A beautiful girl, 22 years old, fresh out of college. They married 6 years ago. A year later, she ended up in a psychiatric clinic in Switzerland. Official diagnosis, acute psychosis from drug addiction. Her parents tried to get her out, but Julian managed to have her declared incompetent. Now, he is her legal guardian. Her entire inheritance, which was not small, passed to his control. He returned to the chair and sat down, leaning heavily on the armrests. The second wife, Olga, was the widow of an industrialist, 5 years older than Julian. A very wealthy woman. They were married for 11 months. Then she died of an overdose of sleeping pills. The investigation was closed in 3 weeks. Suicide due to depression, they said. Julian inherited everything. And you stayed quiet. Elias's voice was hollow. I did not know. Abernathy threw up his hands in a defensive gesture. I swear to you, I did not know. Silas was still alive back then. He covered for his son, and I did not want to see. I did not want to believe. Julian was so charming, so convincing. He cried real tears at Olga's funeral. I held his shoulder and comforted him. He covered his face with his hands. When he asked me to introduce him to your daughter, I was happy to help. I thought I was doing something good, bringing two good people together. Aaliyah was so bright, so full of life. I thought she would change him. When did you realize the truth? Elias asked. 3 months ago. Abernathy uncovered his face. Silas was dying of cancer, and I visited him in the hospital. We were alone, and he started talking, confessing the way dying men sometimes do. He told me about Marina, about Olga, about how he paid doctors for fake diagnoses, how he bribed investigators and judges. He was proud of it. Do you understand? Proud of the son he had raised? His voice broke. He said Julian was special, that he knew how to see in women what they did not even know about themselves, their weaknesses, their fears, their wounds, and use it all to break them from the inside. That was his word, break. Elias felt a chill spread down his spine. Why didn't you go to the police? Abernathy let out a bitter laugh. With what? The ramblings of a dying old man? No proof. By then, Julian had become too influential, too well-connected. His reach extends to offices that scare me, and I have a family, children, grandchildren. I was afraid, Elias, afraid for myself and for them. He looked Elias directly in the eye. But today, when I saw your daughter on the floor, when I saw you in the foyer, I realized I could not stay silent anymore. I cannot live with this. You saved my life, and I handed your daughter over to a killer. Elias stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the abandoned garden grew darker. The bare branches of the trees scratched at the sky like the fingers of the dead. He thought about what he had heard and tried to piece it together into a coherent picture. You said he sees weaknesses, Elias stated without turning around. What did he see in my daughter? Abernathy was silent for a long time before answering. I do not know the details, but Julian once let slip that Aaliyah was the perfect victim. He said she actively seeks out someone to control her, that it is in her blood. Elias closed his eyes. Julian's words in the study echoed in his head again. About Lena, about how she feared her husband, how she cried at night. He told me the same thing, Elias said softly. He said, he is just like me. He turned and saw Abernathy looking at him with a strange expression. Is it true? He asked cautiously. Elias remained silent for a long moment. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering shadows on the walls. When he finally spoke, his voice was raspy. I never hit my wife, he began. I never even raised my voice. On paper, I was the perfect husband. A respected surgeon, good salary, didn't drink, didn't run around. Everyone told Lena how lucky she was. He sat back in the chair and looked at his hands. But I controlled every step she took. I decided what she was going to eat, what she was going to wear, who her friends would be. She wanted to work. I said, no, your place is at home. She wanted to visit her sister. I said, no, I need you here. She wanted another child. I said, no, one is enough. He clenched his fists. I did it with love, with care. I knew better. I was smarter, more experienced, stronger. She had to obey, because I wanted the best for her. That is what I thought. That is how I justified it. What happened to her? Abernathy asked quietly. She got sick when she was 40. The doctors said heart failure, but I am a doctor myself. I know the heart had nothing to do with it. She just lost the will to live. She stopped eating, stopped sleeping. She withered away right in front of me, and I either could not do anything, or I refused to see. Elias raised his head. She died at 52, in our bedroom. In our bed. I came home from work and found her. She was smiling for the first time in years. Silence filled the room, interrupted only by the fire. Aaliyah did not cry at the funeral. Elias continued. I thought she was in shock, but later I understood. It was not grief. It was relief. Her mother was finally free, and Aaliyah was happy for her. He looked Abernathy in the eye. After Lena died, I found her diaries. 30 years of entries, every single day. Thousands of pages about how miserable she was, how she feared me, how she hated her life, how she dreamed of escaping but had nowhere to go, how she prayed for death. His voice cracked. I read them all, every word, and I realized I had been killing her all those years, slowly, imperceptibly. With love in my heart, I killed her without even realizing it. Abernathy held out the glass of cognac. This time, Elias took it and drank it in one gulp. Julian is right, Elias said. Aaliyah grew up in a house where love meant control, where care meant submission. She didn't know anything else. When she met him, she recognized something familiar. She felt at home. That does not make you guilty of what he is doing to her, Abernathy said. No, Elias agreed, but it makes me responsible for her being defenseless. I taught her to accept violence as love. I created the victim he found. He stood up, a new determination in his eyes. But I can still fix this. I cannot get back the years I took from Lena. I cannot undo what I taught Aaliyah. But I can get her out of there. I can give her a chance at a real life. How? Abernathy asked. He has money, connections, lawyers. You have nothing. I have you, Elias said. You know people. You know where to look. I have my medical knowledge. I understand what he is doing. And I have something he does not. I have nothing left to lose. Abernathy looked at him for a long time, and something shifted in his face. Fear gave way to something else. Perhaps shame. Perhaps resolve. All right, he finally said, I will help. But you must understand what you are facing. If we lose, Julian will destroy both of us, and Aaliyah will be taken to a place from which there is no return. If we do not try, she is already gone, Elias replied. Abernathy nodded and pulled out his phone. I have a contact at the district attorney's office, someone as honest as a person can be these days. If I can get traces of the drugs in her blood, witness statements, security footage. There are cameras in the house, but only Julian has access. Abernathy shook his head. The staff is intimidated. They will not talk. And the doctors who prescribe the meds are bought and paid for. There has to be someone, Elias insisted. Someone who sees what is happening and cannot live with it. Abernathy grew thoughtful. There is a housekeeper, he said slowly. Cora, she has been there since the beginning, since the first wife. I have seen how she looks at Julian. Like, she wants to say something, but is too afraid. Can you contact her? I will try, but it is dangerous. If Julian finds out, risk it, Elias said. For my daughter. For your debt. Abernathy looked at him and nodded. I will call you tomorrow afternoon. Stay in the city, but do not go near the mansion. Let Julian think you left. Elias held out his hand. Abernathy shook it. And in that grip was more than a formal agreement. It was the redemption of a 20-year debt. Thank you, Elias said. Do not thank me, Abernathy replied. We haven't done anything yet, and we might not succeed. We will. Elias headed for the door. We have no other choice. He stepped out into the cold night and started walking down the empty street, looking for a taxi. In his head, the words from Lena's diaries echoed. Words he remembered by heart, even though he wanted to forget them. Today he said no again. I asked for so little, just one day with my sister. But he knows best. He always knows best. I no longer ask if I love him. I ask when this will end, and I am afraid of the answer. 20 years ago, he read those lines and cried. He cried out of self-pity, out of a lack of understanding, out of resentment toward the wife who didn't appreciate his care. Now he was crying again, but for something different, for understanding, for shame, for the horror of what he had done to the person he loved, and out of a determination not to let history repeat itself. A taxi pulled up beside him, and Elias got in, giving the address of the nearest hotel. Ahead of him was a long night. Tomorrow a war would begin that he had to win, not for himself, for his daughter, whom he had broken without meaning to, for his wife, to whom he could never apologize, to fix at least one thing before it was too late. The hotel room was small and unremarkable, with thin walls through which he could hear the neighbors' voices and the sound of cars from the street. Elias sat on the hard bed, staring at the phone in his hands, waiting. Almost a full day had passed since he left Abernathy's house, a whole day of inaction that felt harder than any multi-hour surgery. He thought about Aaliyah, about what was happening to her at that very moment while he sat there, about the drugs slowly destroying her mind, about the husband who wiped his feet on her and called her a crazy maid in front of guests. Every hour of delay could be the last. The phone rang at 7 in the evening, after it had already grown dark outside. The number was unknown. Elias. Abernathy's voice sounded tense. I found Cora. She agreed to meet, but only with you. She is afraid of me. She thinks I am Julian's friend. Where and when? Tonight at 9. She goes to buy groceries every night. That is the only time Julian lets her out of the house. The farmer's market on Main Street. Third aisle, the vegetable stand. She will be wearing a gray coat and a blue scarf. Elias wrote down the address and was about to hang up when Abernathy added something else. My contact at the DA's office checked the case of the second wife, Olga. Officially, everything is clean. Suicide. No suspicious circumstances. But he found a record of a statement from a maid that was never included in the case files. What statement? She saw Julian entering his wife's room an hour before the death was announced, and she saw him leave with an empty vial in his hand. The detective noted it down and then crossed it out of the report. A month later, that detective was promoted and transferred to another city. Elias gripped the phone so hard the plastic creaked. Is it enough to open a case? On its own, no. The statement is not certified. The witness recanted the next day, said she was mistaken, that she didn't see clearly. But if we added other evidence to this, the picture starts to form. What other evidence? That depends on what Cora tells you, and if you can get a blood sample from Aaliyah. If traces of medications that weren't officially prescribed are found, it will be the beginning of the end for Julian. Elias hung up and began to prepare. In his duffel bag was a medical kit. He carried out of habit, a habit left over from his military days. Syringes, antidotes, basic meds. He didn't know if he would need it, but he felt that he would. The tea took him to Main Street in 20 minutes. The market was nearly empty. Most vendors were already closing their stalls. Elias found the vegetable stand and waited, pretending to pick out potatoes. Cora appeared at exactly 9. A petite woman in her 50s with a tired face and cautious eyes. Gray coat, blue scarf, just as Abernathy had described. She stopped at the next stand and began looking at carrots, glancing sideways at Elias. He stepped closer, standing beside her, without looking at her. I am Aaliyah's father, he said quietly. You wanted to talk. Cora flinched, even though she was expecting those exact words. Not here, she whispered. Behind the stand, there is an alley to a courtyard. You go first. I will catch up. Elias did as he was told. He passed between the stalls, found the narrow passage between the walls, and stepped into a dark courtyard filled with empty crates and bags. A minute later, Cora appeared, looking around like a cornered animal. I have very little time, she began, speaking hurriedly. If I am more than a half hour late, he starts asking questions. If he suspects I talked to someone... She didn't finish, but she didn't have to. Tell me everything, Elias said. From the beginning. Cora leaned against the wall, her shoulders sagging under the weight of what she was about to say. I have worked in that house for 5 years, she began, since the first wife. Marina was a good girl, cheerful, kind. For the first few months after the wedding, she was happy. And then the changes started. What changes? Small ones at first. She started forgetting words in the middle of a conversation. She would get days of the week confused. She would fall asleep in strange places, right during lunch or on the sofa. In the middle of the day, Julian told the guests she was exhausted. He told the doctors she had sleep problems. Cora swallowed hard. And then the nightmares started. She would wake up at night screaming that someone wanted to kill her, that there were people hiding in the walls, that the food was poisoned. The doctors said paranoid psychosis. They started treating her, giving her pills. But it only got worse. Did you see him give her those pills? Cora nodded. Julian personally, every morning, every night. He said he didn't trust anyone else with it, that he was taking care of her. And she believed him. Right until the end, she believed he wanted to help her. Elias felt a cold rage growing inside him, but he held it back. He needed information, not emotion. What happened then? After a year, they took her to a clinic. Julian cried when he signed the papers, said it was breaking his heart. But he had to think of her health as everyone felt sorry for him. Such a loving husband, such a tragedy. Cora made a face of disgust. And I saw him smile when the car carrying her drove away. I saw him invite friends over that same night and celebrate until dawn. And I heard him tell someone on the phone that the job was done. Why didn't you leave then? Where? Cora looked at him bitterly. I am 55, no education, no family, no savings. Julian pays well, and there is little work for people like me. Besides, I thought I was wrong, that I was imagining things, that this couldn't be happening. She shook her head. And then the second we appeared. Olga, a smart, strong woman. I thought she would handle him. For the first few months, she really did keep him in line. She argued with him, set conditions. He listened, nodded, accepted. But then I noticed her tea had a strange smell, slightly bitter, barely perceptible. I asked the cook what was in it, and the cook said, well, Julian personally prepared the tea for his beloved wife every morning. Cora wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. After 3 months, Olga started to change. She became quiet, docile, confused. She would forget what she was talking about a minute later. She cried for no reason. The doctors said depression. They prescribed pills. Julian gave her those pills and something else of his own. Do you know exactly what he gave her? I found a vial in the trash in his bathroom. A clear liquid with no label. I wanted to keep it, to show it to someone, but Julian noticed I had been looking through the trash. He didn't say anything. He just looked at me. That was enough. She shivered. The next day, Olga was dead, and I found a note on my pillow. It only had one word written on it. Silence. Elias understood now why this woman was so afraid. And he understood how much courage this conversation was costing her. And my daughter? He asked. What is he doing to her? Cora lowered her gaze. The same thing, only slower. Aaliyah lasted longer than the others. For the first 6 months, she was a real fighter. She would scream at him, threaten to leave, call her family. Julian even seemed to like it. I heard him tell a friend that he likes a challenge. She used to call me, Elias said, in a hollow voice, in the first months. And then he took her phone away. He said she got very nervous after talking to relatives, that she needed peace. She believed him.
She always believed him.
Because he knew how to say the right things. Cora began to cry. He showed her a newspaper with your obituary. I saw it myself. She cried for 3 days, didn't eat, didn't drink, and he comforted her, held her in his arms, told her he was her only family now, that he would never leave her. Where did he get the obituary? He printed it himself. He has people who can make any document, passports, certificates, newspaper pages, anything. Aaliyah didn't check. She was too broken. Elias leaned against the wall, feeling the ground shift beneath his feet. His daughter had believed for 1.5 years that he was dead. 1.5 years without anyone who could help her. What is he giving her? He asked, gathering the remains of his self-control. What drugs? I do not know the names, but I know he adds a white powder to her food and gives her injections every night before bed. He says they are vitamins. But I have seen what those vitamins do. She no longer recognizes people, not even me. Her hands shake, especially in the morning. She walks unsteady, like she is drunk. And she is constantly sleepy, but when she does sleep, she screams from nightmares. Elias listened, mentally making a list. Hallucinations, tremors, impaired coordination, confusion. Classic signs of poisoning with neuroleptics combined with something else, likely scopolamine or something from the same group. I need to get to her, he said. Can you take me into the house tonight? Cora backed away, fear flashing in her eyes. It is impossible. The security, the cameras. If he finds out, he will not find out. Elias took a step toward her. You said you go grocery shopping every night. That means you know when the guards change. You know where the camera blind spots are. You know how to get in without being seen. Cora was silent, and he could see the struggle between fear and conscience. Listen to me. He took her by the shoulders. I am a doctor, a retired Army surgeon with 30 years of experience. I can help my daughter. I can get the drugs out of her system. But for that, I need to get to her. You are the only person who can make that happen. He will kill me, Cora whispered. If he finds out, he will kill me. If you do nothing, he will kill Aaliyah, just like he killed Olga. Can you live with that? Can you watch another woman die in that house? Cora closed her eyes. Tears were running down her cheeks. Tonight at 2 a.m, she finally said. The guards change then. There are 5 minutes when the grounds are unpatrolled. The back door you came in yesterday, I will leave it unlocked. Aaliyah's room is on the 2nd floor, 3rd door on the right from the stairs. Thank you. Elias let go of her shoulders. You are saving her life, or I am sentencing us both to death. Cora wiped her tears and pulled a phone from her bag. Here is my number. If something goes wrong, do not come. I will let you know. She dictated the number and disappeared as silently as she had arrived, dissolving into the darkness between the stalls. Elias was left alone in the courtyard among the empty crates and the smell of rotting vegetables. He looked at his watch. 9:30. Until 2 a.m, there were more than 4 hours left. Time to prepare. He returned to the hotel and laid out the contents of his medical kit on the bed. Syringes, ampules, bandages, a bottle of saline, a pack of activated charcoal, and most importantly, 2 antidotes. He had always carried out of habit from his Army hospital days. One was for barbiturate poisoning, the second was for anticholinergics, the very group scopolamine belongs to. If his assumptions were correct, one of these would help Aaliyah regain her lucidity, at least temporarily. Elias checked the expiration dates, checked the integrity of the ampules, and prepared everything he might need. Then he sat by the window and waited. At 1:45, he called a tea and asked to be dropped off 3 blocks from the mansion. He walked the rest of the way, staying in the shadows of the trees and fences. The night was moonless, and the darkness hid him better than any camouflage. The back door of the mansion was unlocked, as Cora had promised. Elias slipped inside and stood motionless, listening to the silence. Only the hum of a refrigerator, somewhere in the kitchen, and the distant snoring of a guard in the room by the front entrance. He moved through the service hallway he already knew, trying not to let the floorboards creak. On the 2nd floor, it was darker, but his eyes had already adjusted. 3rd door on the right from the stairs, he remembered. The door was not locked. Elias pushed it open and stepped inside. The room was large and nearly empty. A bed against the wall, a nightstand, a window with heavy curtains, and Aaliyah lying on the bed in an unnatural posture, as if she had been thrown there and forgotten. Elias approached and knelt by the bed. In the dark, his daughter's face looked waxen and lifeless. He checked the pulse at her neck, weak but steady. Then he took a small flashlight from his bag and turned it on, shielding the light with his palm. Aaliyah's pupils were dilated. They barely reacted to the light. On her arms were dozens of needle marks, old and new. Her skin was pale and dry, her lips cracked. He checked the nightstand. A half-empty glass of water, pills in a blister pack without a label, a vial with a clear liquid, also unlabeled. Elias smelled the liquid and recognized the characteristic scent. His suspicion was confirmed. He pulled out the syringe and the ampule of antidote. His hands did not shake, though his heart was beating so hard the thumping echoed in his temples. 30 years of practice had taught him to separate emotion from action. Right now, he was not a father. He was a surgeon. The injection took only seconds. Now, all that was left was to wait. Elias sat on the edge of the bed and took his daughter's hand in his. It was cold and limp, like that of a sleeping child. He looked at her face and remembered how she was when she was little. How she would run through the house. How she laughed. How she would wrap her arms around his neck when he came home from work. He didn't remember when she stopped hugging him. He didn't notice the moment his daughter started avoiding him, when warmth turned into polite distance, when love transformed into obligation. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Aaliyah remained still. Suddenly, her eyelids moved. Her fingers tightened weakly around his hand. Her lips parted. "Dad," she whispered so softly he barely heard her. "Dad." Elias leaned closer. "I am here," he said. "I am with you." Aaliyah opened her eyes slowly. There was confusion, fear, and something else in them. Something that looked like hope. "Are you alive?" She blinked, as if she didn't believe her own eyes. "He said you were dead. He showed me the newspaper. I thought I was alone." Elias squeezed her hand tighter. "I am alive. I came for you." Aaliyah tried to sit up, but her body wouldn't obey. She fell back against the pillow, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I wanted to call you," she whispered, "when it all started, but he took my phone. He said you didn't care, that you never loved me. And then he showed me the obituary, and I believed him. I thought I had no one left. You are not alone." Elias felt tears burning in his own eyes. "You were never alone. It is my fault. You ended up here. I taught you things I shouldn't have. I showed you the wrong kind of love. But I am going to get you out of here now. Do you hear me? We are leaving together." Aaliyah looked at him, and a clarity appeared in her eyes that hadn't been there yesterday. The antidote was working. "He will not let me go," she said. "He has guards, lawyers, connections. He told me I was his property, that I wasn't going anywhere." "He is wrong," Elias replied, "because now you have me, and I am not leaving until you are free." Somewhere downstairs, a door slammed. Footsteps could be heard. Elias tensed, ready for action. The door to the room creaked open, and Cora's face appeared in the frame. "Fast," she whispered. "The guard change ended early. You have 3 minutes." Elias acted quickly, the way he was used to acting in an operating room when every second counts. He took Aaliyah by the arms and helped her sit up. Her body was weak, almost weightless, but her eyes were looking with awareness now, and that gave him hope. "Can you walk?" he asked in a whisper. Aaliyah tried to stand, but her legs buckled, and she nearly fell. Elias caught her and realized he would have to carry her. He put his arm around her waist, threw her arm over his shoulder, and headed for the door. Cora waited in the hallway, listening to the sounds in the house. Somewhere below, the guards were talking. Their voices were muffled, but getting closer. "No, not the main stairs," Cora whispered. "There is a service passage at the end of the hall that leads to the kitchen. From there, through the back door." They moved through the dark hallway, and Elias felt Aaliyah trying to walk on her own. She was trying not to be a burden, even though her legs barely supported her. The service stairs were narrow and steep. Going down them with a semi-conscious person in his arms was nearly impossible. But Elias managed, holding on to the railing with one hand and supporting his daughter with the other. The kitchen was empty and dark. Cora led them between the tables and refrigerators toward the door that led to the patio. They were a few steps from freedom, and then the lights flickered on. Julian was standing against the opposite wall, leaning on the doorframe with a glass of wine in his hand. He was wearing a housecoat and looked completely relaxed, as if he had been waiting for them and wasn't surprised at all. "What a touching scene," he said, his voice almost friendly. "The selfless father rescuing his poor daughter from the villain's clutches. Just like a bad movie." Elias stopped instinctively, shielding Aaliyah with his body. Cora backed into a corner. Her face had gone white as chalk. "Cora! Cora!" Julian shook his head with feigned disappointment. "I treated you like a member of the family. I paid you double the market rate. I turned a blind eye to your little thefts, and this is your gratitude?" "I didn't steal anything," Cora whispered with a trembling voice. "You stole," Julian smiled. "At least, that is what the police will say when I find my wife's jewelry in your room. They are already there, by the way. I put them there this morning just in case." He took a sip of wine and turned to Elias. "And you, Elias, you disappointed me more than anyone. I offered you a dignified way out. Money, peace, the possibility of living the rest of your life in comfort. Instead, you decided to play the hero. Move away from the door," Elias said in a calm voice. "Or what?" Julian laughed. You going to hit me again? My guards will be here in 30 seconds, and this time I will not be so indulgent." He set the glass on the table and pulled a phone from his pocket. "One call, and you both go to the police. Trespassing. Attempted kidnapping of an incapacitated person. Assault on the homeowner. And Aaliyah goes to a state facility. I have all the documents, medical reports, doctors' signatures. My godfather is a state Supreme Court judge. How do you think this ends for you?" "She is not incapacitated," Elias said, taking a step forward. "She is being poisoned by you, with the same drugs you used on Marina and Olga." Something flashed in Julian's eyes, but he quickly recovered. "Delusions of a sick imagination. I have medical documents signed by the best specialists. And what do you have? The words of a senile maid and the paranoia of a retired VA doctor." "I have your wife's blood sample," Elias said, and it was a lie. But Julian couldn't know that. "Taken 10 minutes ago. Tomorrow morning it will be in an independent lab." Julian froze, the phone in his hand. For the first time in the entire conversation, his confidence cracked. "You are bluffing. Test me." They stared at each other, the seconds stretching like hours. Then the kitchen door leading to the foyer burst open. Several people entered, but it wasn't security. The first was Silas Abernathy, wearing an overcoat, thrown hastily over his pajamas. Behind him was a man in the uniform of the district attorney's office with a file in his hands, and two plainclothes police officers who immediately spread through the kitchen, blocking the exits. Julian stared at his godfather with an expression of absolute incomprehension. "Silas?" His voice trembled for the first time. "What does this mean?" Abernathy didn't answer. He looked at Julian as one looks at someone seen for the first time who causes nausea. The prosecutor stepped forward. "Julian Kingsley, we need you to accompany us to make a statement regarding the death of your second wife, Olga Kingsley. We have reason to believe her death was not a suicide." "This is absurd, fool." Julian raised his voice. "You have no proof. The case was closed 4 years ago." "The case has been reopened," the prosecutor said, placing the file on the table, "on the basis of new testimony and the results of a new forensic review. Furthermore, we have received a request from the Swiss clinic where your first wife is institutionalized. The doctors there are expressing concern about the nature of her illness and wish to perform an independent examination." Julian directed his gaze at Abernathy. "It was you," he hissed. "You, whom my father pulled out of the gutter. You, to whom he gave everything." "Your father died 3 months ago," Abernathy replied quietly. "And before he died, he told me the truth. About Marina, about Olga, about everything he helped you hide. He was proud of you, Julian, proud of the monster he had raised. He shook his head. And I spent 20 years carrying a debt to the man who saved my life, and I paid it by handing his daughter to a killer. Today, I correct that mistake. Julian lunged for the back door, but one of the officers was faster. A second later, he was face down against the kitchen table, his hand pinned behind his back. The handcuffs clicked shut on his wrists. "I have a lawyer," he screamed. "I have connections. You do not know who you are dealing with." The prosecutor nodded to the officers, and they pulled Julian up. "Your connections are very busy right now," he said calmly, "answering questions about their own involvement in your affairs." Silas proved to be a very informative conversationalist. They led Julian toward the exit. At the door, he turned and looked at Aaliyah, who was standing supported by her father. For the first time in a long time, she was looking at her husband without fear. "You are still mine," he said. "By law, you are going nowhere." Aaliyah stood up straight. Her voice was weak but firm. "I am filing for divorce today, and I will testify to everything you did to me. Every pill, every injection, every day you stole from me." She took a step toward him, and Elias was amazed at how much strength was in this frail woman. "You said I was your property, that I was the doormat you wiped your feet on. Well, now you are the doormat, and I am walking right over you." She turned around and walked away without looking back. Elias followed her, and the last thing he heard was Julian's voice breaking into a scream. "This is not over. Do you hear me? This is not over." But it was the end, at least for him. The next few hours melted into a continuous blur for Elias. Interrogations at the DA's office, medical exams for Aaliyah at the hospital, endless forms and reports. Abernathy remained by his side, helping him navigate the bureaucratic labyrinths that were completely foreign to a retired army surgeon. By dawn, Aaliyah lay in a private room, connected to an IV that was flushing the last of the poison from her system. The doctor said she would recover physically in a few weeks. Her psyche would be more complicated, but they were optimistic, especially considering she was now safe and knew the truth. Elias was sitting by her bed, holding his daughter's hand. Outside, it was morning, and the first rays of the sun tinted the hospital room with warm, golden tones. "Dad," Aaliyah opened her eyes. "Are you still here?" "I'm not going anywhere," he replied, "unless you throw me out yourself." She smiled weakly, but the smile quickly faded. "I need to tell you something," she said softly. "Something I never told you. You do not have to rest." "I have to." She squeezed his hand. "I should have said it many years ago, but I was afraid. Afraid of you. Afraid of what you would do. Afraid of what I would feel when I said it out loud." Elias remained silent, giving her time to gather her strength. "You were just like him," Aaliyah said, and her voice did not tremble. "Not as cruel, not as open about it, but the same. You controlled Mom every day of her life. You decided everything for her, what she would eat, what she would wear, who she would be friends with. You called it care, but it was a prison." Tears ran down her cheeks, but she didn't stop. "I grew up in that prison. I thought it was normal, that this was how all families lived, that the man should control and the woman should obey. When I met Julian, he seemed familiar, safe. I recognized you in him, and I thought that was okay." "Aaliyah, let me finish." She raised her hand. "When Mom died, I did not cry. Do you remember? Everyone thought I was in shock. But the truth is, I was happy for her, happy that she was finally free. And I hated you for that. I hated you for what you did to her. for what you did to me." Elias lowered his head. Every word fell on him like a hammer, and he accepted those blows because he deserved every single one. "I know," he said finally. "I found her diaries after the funeral. I read them all night, and I understood what kind of monster I had been all those years." He raised his eyes to his daughter, his own eyes full of tears. "I cannot change the past. I cannot give your mother back the years I took from her. I cannot erase what I taught you, but I can recognize my guilt, and I can try to be a different person if you give me a chance." Aaliyah looked at him in silence for a long time. In her eyes was the pain of years and a rage that found no exit, and something else, something like the exhaustion of hating. "I do not know if I can forgive you," she finally said. "Maybe I never can, but you came for me. You risked everything to save me, and you recognized what you did, instead of justifying yourself." She squeezed his hand harder. "That is not enough to erase the past, but it is enough to try to build something new." Elias nodded, not trusting his own voice. "I want to ask you for something," Aaliyah continued. "When I get out of here, I do not want to go back to your house. I want to live alone. I want to learn to make my own decisions. I want to discover who I am when no one tells me what to do." Elias brought her hand to his lips and kissed it. "I will be as close as you want, and I will step away whenever you ask. I promise." Aaliyah closed her eyes, and for the first time in a long time, her face looked peaceful. "I need to sleep," she whispered. "Will you stay?" "I will stay." She fell asleep within minutes, and Elias remained sitting by her side, listening to her rhythmic breathing. Outside, the city was waking up, and the sounds of the street filtered through the glass, a reminder that life goes on. A week later, Aaliyah was discharged from the hospital. A month later, her divorce was finalized. 3 months later, the trial against Julian began. The testimonies of 3 women he had tried to destroy became the primary evidence for the prosecution. Marina, whom they brought from the Swiss clinic, turned out to be perfectly lucid once they stopped poisoning her. Her testimony was particularly harrowing. Julian received 15 years. His lawyers appealed the sentence, but the appeal was rejected. The connections he was so proud of vanished like smoke when it became clear that defending him was dangerous for their reputations. Silas Abernathy sold his business and left the state. Before leaving, he met with Elias and told him that he finally felt free of the debt. Not because he had paid it, but because he had done the right thing, even when it was terrifying. Cora found a job at a retirement home where no one had ever heard of her. She wrote letters to Aaliyah every month, and Aaliyah answered every single one. And Elias learned to be a different kind of father. It was hard, harder than any surgery he had ever performed. He learned to listen instead of direct, to ask instead of decide, to be present without overwhelming. Every day was a small victory or a small defeat, but he didn't give up. One day, a year after those events, Aaliyah invited him to dinner at her small apartment. She cooked it herself. She set the table herself. She chose the wine herself. When he walked in, she hugged him. For the first time in many years, she hugged him for real, strong, the way you hug people you love. "Thank you," she said, "for coming back then, for staying, for changing." Elias hugged her back and felt a warmth spread through his chest. It wasn't redemption, because there are some things that cannot be redeemed. But it was something like peace, acceptance, the possibility of moving forward. They had dinner and talked late into the night about the past that cannot be changed, about the present they were building together, about the future that for the first time in a long time was not scary. When Elias was leaving, Aaliyah walked him to the door. At the threshold, she stopped and said, "Do you know what I realized this year? That forgiveness is not a moment. It is a process. Every day I decide again whether to hold on to the pain or let it go. And every day, it gets a little bit easier." Elias nodded. "I realize that too. And I am grateful for every day you give me the chance to be better." He stepped out into the night and walked down the street toward his home. The city was asleep, but some windows were still lit. And behind each one was its own story, its own mistakes and victories, its own monsters and heroes. Elias didn't know if he had become a hero. Probably not. But he knew for certain that he had stopped being a monster. And that was more than he deserved. I'm really glad you're here, and that I could share my story with you. If you liked it, show me by liking the video and subscribing to my channel. Let's see how many of us there are. Write in the comments which city you're watching from and what time it is. I'm so curious to know where all you wonderful people are tuning in from. If you want to support me a little extra, you can also send a small donation. I share new life stories for you every single day. And now, 2 of my most popular stories will pop up on the screen, so you can choose what to watch next